In today's review video, we're going to look at the progressive era. This is a movement that started in the late 19th century and carried into the early 20th century. And while this is a massive movement of social and political reform, we cannot fit all of it into one review video. So for the purposes of today's video, we're going to look at the goals and effects of the progressives, as well as important figures that you need to remember from the movement. Let's get started. The progressive era is characterized by the tireless efforts of individuals known as muckrakers. This was a term used by Teddy Roosevelt, referencing these journalists and activists who were always raking up muck. Now, it should be noted that he borrowed this term from John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, where there is a character named Muckraker. And the premise is they're always raking up muck. These journalists and activists exposed corruption, injustice, and social inequalities. One such figure was Upton Sinclair, whose novel The Jungle shed light on the unsanitary conditions of the meatpacking industry, leading to the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act in 1906. And we are certainly thankful for the Meat Inspection Act and Pure Food and Drug Act, because now we can sit in a restaurant and eat a hamburger and trust that it is beef. Or can we? Jacob Riis, through his groundbreaking photojournalism, revealed the harsh realities of urban poverty in works like How the Other Half Lives, prompting calls for housing reform and improved living conditions. Another muckraker of the period is Jane Addams, founder of the Hull House, who pioneered the settlement house movement, providing social services to immigrant communities. Meanwhile, African Americans like W.E.B. Du Bois, the founder of the Niagara movement and eventually the NAACP, fought for equal protection under the law and in education for African Americans, while another African American, Ida B. Wells, fought tirelessly for racial equality and against the horrors of lynching. But you also have Ida Tarbell's investigative journalism, which targeted the monopolistic practices of John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company. Also Lincoln Steffens, who exposed political corruption at the state and local level in his series titled The Shame of the Cities. During the progressive era, we're also going to see landmark legislation aimed at regulating big business, which, if you think about our discussion during the Gilded Age, we saw a lot of laissez-faire economic policies. And remember, laissez-faire simply means hands off the economy. Good, bad, or indifferent, leave it alone. Don't touch it. It'll correct itself. It'll fix itself. The government's job is not to regulate the economy under laissez-faire philosophies. But during the progressive era, we're going to see major legislation not only passed, but also we're going to see the federal government actually enforce pieces of legislation that were already on the books, like the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, which sought to break up monopolies and promote fair competition. Its successor, which was passed in 1914, the Clayton Antitrust Act, strengthened those antitrust regulations and prohibited certain business practices, while also supporting labor unions. At the state level, we will see legislation passed to hold state and local governments more accountable to its citizens, one of which is the secret ballot, which I know that sounds kind of bizarre to us, but before this, there was no such thing as a secret ballot. We'll also see initiative, referendum, and recall introduced at the state and local levels. Initiatives allow voters to require legislators to consider a bill even if they don't want to consider it or try to ignore it. Referendum allowed voters themselves to vote on the adoption of proposed bills. And then recall is going to allow the citizens of a state to remove a corrupt politician before their term was complete. The progressive era is also going to witness the ratification of 4 constitutional amendments during this period of time. The first of which is the 16th Amendment, which is going to grant the federal government the ability to tax the income of American citizens. This is going to help the government generate far more revenue than it's ever been able to generate before. Remember, prior to the 16th Amendment, the primary source of revenue from the federal government was through the use of tariffs. The 17th Amendment is going to call on the direct election of U.S. senators. This is what the populace had been pushing for so long. Farmers wanted the ability to elect their own senators. The 18th Amendment is going to call on the prohibition of alcohol. This is the culmination of the temperance movement led by people like Francis Willard. This is a big, big moment in American history because, quite frankly, it doesn't work. All we see is a rise in crime. People are still going to drink during the 1920s under the rule of prohibition, and we will eventually see its repeal in the Great Depression era known as the 21st Amendment. That leads us to the fourth and final progressive era amendment, and that is the 19th Amendment. This is the culmination of the work of people like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and others in the women's suffrage movement. The 19th Amendment is going to grant women the right to vote, also known as women's suffrage. One of the biggest advantages that progressives had during this period that previous generations did not have is they had someone in the executive office who sought to work with them, and that is Teddy Roosevelt himself. President Roosevelt, a towering figure of the progressive era, implemented his square deal platform, which aimed to ensure a square deal for all Americans. Roosevelt's trust-busting policies targeted monopolistic corporations, earning him the nickname, the Trust Buster. However, it's important to note that Roosevelt did not view all trusts the same way. He defined them as good or bad trusts, and if you landed on his naughty list, he was coming for you. Roosevelt also championed conservation, establishing national parks, forests, and monuments to preserve America's natural beauty for future generations. In fact, he will use the Forest Reserve Act of 1891 to reserve 150 million acres of land, which will please conservationists like John Muir. In 1896, the courts will rule in Plessy versus Ferguson that segregation is legal so long as the separate facilities are equal. As we can all gather, these separate facilities were not equal. But this is going to justify to the South what it has been doing since the end of Reconstruction and will allow them to move forward with these practices legally for the next 75 years. So while the progressive movement addressed a lot of things socially, economically, and politically, the issue of race and equality under the law, protecting the 14th Amendment, is still an issue that the country continues to sweep under the rug. That's all the time we have for today. If you like the video, click below. Also subscribe to our channel, and I would like to ask you that if you know someone who would benefit from these videos, someone who is getting ready to take their end of the year exam, please share this with them so that we can help as many people as we possibly can. We'll see you next time.